Serious employers. What's the most insane complaint you've had about an employee that turned out to be completely true? Our worker took a shit in the toilet of a vacant apartment that didn't have running water and then didn't say anything and left. They know they are supposed to use bathrooms in the office's clubhouses because vacant units never have running water. The complex didn't find it until 3 days later when they brought a potential tenant for a walkthrough. It had been over 100 degrees all week. The woman I spoke to said there wasn't any toilet paper either. I only know of this because it involved myself, but I was fresh working for a security company 4 months give or take, given a new assignment with a couple of other guys on rotation. Someone who had been there a week or so more than me gave me the obligatory tour of the site, pointed out some hot spots, pointed out some key equipment that needed an eye on, etc. Less than a week of shifts go by where the same guy offers me a bump of cocaine decline. Just over a month later, had a perfectly fine shift, no issues. About an hour before my shift, boss calls me up pissed as heck at me, obviously confused. I get to the place early. The place has been turned over. Equipment is gone. Fence is busted wide open. The works. One of the on-site trailers has been broken into where just over $1,000 was stolen from a safe I knew nothing about because it was always locked. I was pointed to as the culprit. It took less than 5 minutes of conversation with the boss to get it ironed out, as because not only had stuff gone from this place, but other stuff had gone missing from other sites the cocaine guy had been to before. Fast forward and one of the things taken was towable and found in the guy's driveway. Might as well have dipped himself in red paint, let alone his hands. Needless to say, he didn't work for that company after that. Also had a depressed boss years later who tanked the entire company. Hadn't come into work for more than a day each week. Basically left his wife to do most of the work. Then because of a workers insurance thing he was collecting cash from everyone. Exact same night he ended up upside down in a ditch. When police arrived he was discovered with 2 hookers and a lot of cocaine and just over $1,000 in cash. He'd basically used the money he collected from me and the other personnel to which was over $5,000 and barely had $1,000 left from it. He was arrested. The company went under. Took a while, but we got our money back. Our head got a call from a sex chat administrator informing our official account is unpaid. They will take legal action if we don't pay immediately. I thought it was a joke. Anyways, we did get a legal notice. Then legal and our investigated. The sex chat company sent a phone call copy. As soon I played it, my our lady screamed, "I know this guy. He works in supply chain." Later on, we realized we had an employee who used to make phone sex chat calls using our company landline. We politely told him to pay up and settle the matter, then issued a final warning letter. This happened a while ago. Before 2000. An employee who had been fired and apparently wasn't happy about it on his last day placed a phone call to a sex line and then placed the receiver so it looked like he had hung up, but the call was still active. This was a Friday and apparently the call didn't get stopped until Monday morning. I think they couldn't conclusively prove he had done it, so they just had to carry the cost. The cemetery director was selling plots, pocketing the money $750, and selling the same plot to another family. The second family would show up ready to bury their deceased, only to find the grave already being used. He got away with it for a year. I worked at a cemetery and apparently a woman before my time was crooked as heck. The big thing that got her fired was when a child died and the family started paying on a marker. Now, those things are expensive and they got a nice one, so it took a while to pay it off. Various family members would come in to make payments from $50 to $2,000 for the parents, and this bitch took the money, wrote a fake contract, said the money was a down payment, and merrily took the commission. It was found out when not only did people not pay on those false contracts, shocker, but the parents came in asking how much was left to pay after so and so put down a couple grand. They had to wait almost an extra year to get their little girl's marker put down. Many years ago, the bookshop I worked at hired a new employee with terminal cancer. Very sad. Since she was quite young, she wasn't around too much due to the chemotherapy, etc. But when she was in, she worked in the children's department. She was actually a pretty good children's bookseller. and was a huge fan of a fairly major American children's author. She ran the UK branch of his fan club and knew him personally. He occasionally flew her out to the States for events. One day, she wasn't in, and all employees were called to a staff meeting. We were informed that she had passed away. There was a lot of sadness. Her close colleagues were devastated. Only a few days later, one of our staff happened to go into a branch of McDonald's in a nearby town. Guess who was working behind the counter? Go on. Guess. Turns out she was never ill. She had made the whole cancer thing up, as well as faking her own death. For reasons that we never really fully understood, the general consensus was that it started out as a way to connect with her author hero and kind of spiraled from there. In the end, she couldn't handle living the lie anymore, and so just up and had her mother tell people that she'd died, and then got a job in Maxi's a few miles down the road, and was surprised when she got found out. That was a pretty what the duck sort of experience for us all. New hire. Kinda weird. Definitely suffering from a lack of social skills. Fast forward a few days, and a customer comes back to return a piece of merchandise, claiming when they got home there was blood on it. We looked. Yeah, that was blood. We looked up the transaction. Only about 45 minutes earlier, new hire had set it up. Went to find him, but he wasn't in his department. Not necessarily a big deal. We had to go back into the warehouse for stuff all the time. Went to find him. There he was, in the warehouse, cutting his wrists with a razor blade, bleeding all over the place. This was through a friend of mine who worked as a security guard for a mall. There were multiple complaints about the one lady who never showed up for her shift, and when the supervisor looked into it, nothing would happen. Eventually it came to light that the woman didn't exist, and the supervisor had been collecting her paychecks for almost a year. Shady managers love shit like that. Years back, a friend of mine got audited by the eyes because her old boss had rehired her after changing the address and direct deposit info. Anytime he could shave hours from the other employees and still get his bonus, he gave them to my friend. The company dealt with it by firing the guy, issuing her replacement W-2s and offering to pay for a tax guy to deal with the eyes. Oh, and when she went back to them after college, they paid her $5.75 more an hour. The former manager had loaded her up with raises during the 13 months she'd been a phantom, and they let her keep them. Another friend had his former employer contest unemployment, saying he still worked there and presenting 4 months of pay stubs as proof. The company lawyers even made the point of sending a letter afterward saying that, since he had been terminated for an attempt to commit unemployment fraud, should he ever set foot on any company property he would be prosecuted for trespass. So he reported them to the Department of Labor. See if he still worked there. Like they said, they owed him his pay. Shit got straightened out fast once Labor came calling. His old manager had an unhireable felon brother, and the two were working a scheme. The brother would do his job, the manager would cash the paychecks out of petty cash, and the two would split it. Company wanted to keep the whole thing quiet, so after forcing the manager to resign, it hired him back with back pay and a raise. Personally, I had to turn my own manager in for a scam after he was refused a raise and put his 4-year-old twins on payroll as part-time janitors. It was caught early and hadn't stolen very much money, so the company made him pay it back. They didn't even fire him. They did, however, make it very clear that if one unkind word was ever aimed in my direction, he would be. I survived the contract and even got a performance bonus thanks to that manager. I just fired an intern because he thought it'd be funny to smack one of the girls on the ass. Upon further investigation, she had been having anxiety coming to work because he would ask all sorts of ridiculously inappropriate questions. For example, he asked her if she had a good weekend. She told him it was a good weekend or some plain answer, and he then asked her if it was because she ducked her boyfriend a lot. Needless to say, her anxiety was warranted, and we fired him as soon as we could. The mood in my group seems a bit more relaxed this week. I always hate this. There's the generic plays nice with other skill that is difficult to measure, but can absolutely tank a team's productivity and morale. It gets increasingly difficult to manage when the person is an otherwise good worker in measurable aspects and senior management are only have anecdotal things about the Person being unpleasant to go on. I knew a guy who worked at Subway back when they gave out stamps. Basically for every 6 inches of sub you bought you earned a stamp, and once you filled a card with 8 stamps you could get a free 6-inch sub. So this guy started only giving stamps to customers who asked for them. If they didn't ask, he pocketed their stamps and grew a sizable stack of complete stamp cards. Then over time he started cashing them in. When a customer paid with cash he would ring it in as a freebie, place his own completed stamp card in the till, and pocket the cash. Customer got their sub. Subway's till was balanced, and he had an extra $5 to $10 in his pocket. Everybody was happy. He worked there for a few years and word was he racked up a few $1,000s running this scheme. No idea if anybody complained, or if he was ever caught, but he did buy a motorbike. I work at a major retailer in Australia. Back in 2015. We got a tip from an anonymous customer that one of our managers was a pedophile and had groomed this customer's daughter years back. No one believed it at first, and the higher-ups did an investigation just as a formality. Turns out, TBs of child porn was found in his possession, including some photos that he had taken himself. After that we all had to undertake mandatory training on what to do if we suspect pedophilia in a co-worker. Had an employee that was actively robbing local banks on his days off. I believe he hit 8-9 different banks before he got caught. Found out about it during an early FBI raid of the employee locker break rooms done in conjunction with a raid on his house. To say it was a shock was an understatement. He wasn't even top 20 of my list of potential felonious employees. Had a complaint that someone was driving one of our machines with a giant swastika on the side. Never in a million years. Went down and there it was. Person was fired immediately, but he didn't care. I used to work on a trading floor, and one of my juniors brought me a client he'd discovered himself. After speaking with the guy I decided not to proceed, because I didn't think he was eligible for the investment. A few days later, I got a call from the client asking if the money had gone through. Turns out my junior had sold him on the deal himself, and instead of giving him the company bank details for the transfer, he gave him his own instead. Needless to say the client wasn't too happy. Working in a bank. Had a teller about 19-year-old get pissed about the way a customer retail store owner would send in her deposits at the drive-up window. The teller complained about the customer on Facebook, tagged the lady personally, as well as the store. Customer called the bank and told me. Furious of course. I told the customer we would investigate. I asked the teller. She straight up admitted it, and says what's the customer or branch manager going to do about it? My grandfather is friends with the bank president. I called our bank president on conference. Girl lost her job in under 15 minutes of me receiving the call from the customer. Breach of customer confidentiality in banking is a major law violation. I was the head night auditor at an upscale airport property. Had a youngish night auditor who put a room into out of order status and let his friends in to party and have an orgy that he joined during his lunch break. He got caught because of a noise complaint. Police called. He was fired and blacklisted from being hired back. That the guy was stalking a female employee. It was a 24-hour retailer and she was a morning shift and he was night shift. So I just thought there was no way they knew each other. Then one day I was filling in for a different manager and he came into the break room and was taking pictures of the morning shift schedule. I asked him why, and he told me some story about another employee just wanted him to send their schedule, etc. I came in on my day off later that week during day shift and caught him staring at her from a different aisle while she was stocking. She had no idea he would follow her home and watch her house and all that. She was 17. He was 38. I called the cops and had him escorted off the property and helped her get in touch with the right resources for a restraining order. He ended up violating the order multiple times and is in jail last I heard. Had a supervisor that did that at one of my old jobs a long ass time ago. I was working in the snack bar at a local Target and we'd gone through a handful of employees who just didn't work out for whatever reason. Then they hired this guy, I'll call him Red, because he had reddish hair and I can't remember his name anyway, to be a supervisor. He was probably late 20s, early 30s, somewhere around there. He was an asshole, if I remember correctly. All the depth leads at Target had walkie-talkies and headsets. Red had neither, and neither did our lead supervisor. I don't think, because we just didn't need them in the snack bar. Red, however, insisted that we did and threw a fit to multiple depth leads, including the customer service lead, about it. Because of the store's location, we often had construction workers come in to grab a quick breakfast. One of the construction workers who came in regularly for about 2-3 weeks was a lady, and Red decided to try and hit on her. When she told him she was married, he upped the ante. One day, she came in, and before she could even walk up to the counter, he reached out and grabbed her hand and tried to pull her towards him. If I remember correctly, the next day her husband, who was several inches taller, heavier and muscular than Red, came in and told him to leave his wife alone or he was gonna get it. Another time, Red started hitting on one of the pharmacists. She didn't want anything to do with him, so he followed her out to her car. When she locked the door and told him to get lost, he walked to the back of the car and started pushing up and down on the bumper, which freaked her the duck out, and she called the cops on his ass. The absolute last straw was his doing a no-call no-show. I'd left a note for our lead supervisor about his no-call no-show, and Red became absolutely furious at me, like screaming in my face, threatening to hit me. That got him fired. Why his other creepy ass behavior didn't, I don't know. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.